Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan SP. This is Ukraine War news update concerning the peace negotiations that have been taking place and will take place, and the meeting in Alaska between Trump and Putin that is due very soon. So first of all, we're going to go to the Washington Post that says the Kremlin has no intention of returning territories in Kherson and Zaporizhia, where Russians have secured land bridge to occupy Crimea. We have heard, and I reported on this at the end of my hits and losses video yesterday, that it appears that what the Russians have in mind in territorial swaps that Trump has been talking about, a bit of land swapped here, a bit of jiggery pokery there, and we'll have some exchanges for the betterment of both, as he said. But actually, the Russians only have in mind those tiny areas at the top of Kharkiv and the area possibly in Sumy, uh, south of Kursk. But actually, those four oblasts outside of Crimea, you've got Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk, they don't appear to be willing to give any of that up. And in fact, want more. They want all of Luhansk and all of Donetsk. They want the Ukrainians to withdraw out of there. So the whole thing's ridiculous, as we know. So, Washington Post, this is only a temporary ceasefire in exchange for territory. It is designed to give Putin a long term advantage against Ukraine and the West. The Washington Post article is titled Russians Cheer Putin's Alaska Invitation, Envision No Concessions on Ukraine. Analysts noted Alaska was once part of the Russian Empire, and some nationalists believe it should be returned. So the whole thing just plays into the hands of the Russians. And then we start seeing this. This is Kirill Dmitriev, the guy that met Steve Witkoff, the envoy to Russia, first in Moscow, walked around Moscow with him. He's now posting some of the historic Russian Orthodox churches in Alaska. This is an absolute win for the Russians to have that meeting in Alaska. Trump still hasn't figured out what a massive propaganda win it was to let the Russians con him into holding a summit in Alaska, says Jay in Kiev. Russian officials drive in the nails. And then here we have Kiev Independent saying the White House is not ruling out Zelensky's participation in Alaska in the US-Russia meetings, according to CNN. So while this is seen as a big win for Russia, it has been thought that bilateral meeting between the US and Russia is just a step too far. You can't negotiate away. Not even negotiate away. There's no negotiations. You come to some prearranged proposal to give away Ukrainian land, and you're doing that without Ukraine. It's about Ukraine, but without Ukraine. One unnamed White House official told CNN that anything with Zelensky's involvement would likely be scheduled after Trump's meeting with Putin. So, unfortunately, it's not a trilateral meeting. It will be a bilateral meeting, and then a bit of an afterthought with Zelensky, between Zelensky and I presume probably with Trump, rather than a meeting with Putin. But who knows? I think it's just all a bit of an afterthought. And then we have Europe. So Europe is standing up for Ukraine. You might debate about how strong Europe is being, but they are at least fully on Ukraine's side. Rhetorically, they seem to be pretty on point. 7 EU leaders warned Trump against Ukraine territorial concessions before the Putin summit. France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Britain, and EU officials have warned the US that they will maintain military support for Ukraine regardless of any Trump-Putin agreements. Actually, you can throw in Finland to there. They didn't include the Finnish president's signature on that letter. So we'll come to that in a second. The Wall Street Journal, European proposal stipulates that any territorial concessions by Kiev must be accompanied by cast iron security guarantees, including possible membership of Ukraine in NATO. We are back to where we were, which is where the coalition of willing came about, because there has to be a security guarantee for Ukraine. That you can't freeze the front lines and then say that this side has that amount of land, this side has that amount of land. What is to stop Russia just continuing the war after that, or waiting a little while, reconstituting, and then attacking again? because Ukraine will be in exactly the same situation with the same number of people at their disposal. You have to have Western troops supporting or Western air aviation or Western weaponry in some way supporting a ceasefire. There has to be a security guarantee. But we've been through this before. The frustration is that this is just seems to work in cycles where the American administration appeared to be like goldfish, forgetting that that was the case before, and then coming up with this new proposal that is exactly the same as the last proposal. And by the way, it's the Russian proposal, and the same issues exist. So, Trump first told European leaders that Russia was ready to leave the southern regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia in exchange for full control over the Donbass. So, Wall Street Journal is, and I talked about this yesterday, but let's just go over it just very quickly again, that Steve Witkoff got it wrong, and you've got the guy at the center of these negotiations just not understanding what the hell is going on. Just absolutely inadequate, inept, unqualified for the position he's in. After that, Zelensky said that Russia was more inclined to a ceasefire, but it was important they do not deceive anyone in the details. But already on the second call on Thursday, Witkoff denied the information that Russia was going to leave from somewhere. And only later, Witkoff honestly said that the only offer on the table was a unilateral withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the Donbass in exchange for a ceasefire. Quote, this offer is much worse than what Trump told us on Wednesday, the European official said. In other words, they had to rejig what they initially thought because they got it wrong. When it became clear what Putin's plan was, Zelensky and European leaders immediately rejected it. Yes. And now the European leaders have come out with this statement. So the statement by President Macron, Prime Minister Meloni, Chancellor Merz, Prime Minister Tusk, Prime Minister Starmer, President von der Leyen, and President Stubb on peaceful Ukraine ahead of President Trump's planned meeting with President Putin. Brussels, 10th of August 2025. We welcome President Trump's work to stop the killing in Ukraine and the Russian Federation's war of aggression and achieve just and lasting peace and security for Ukraine. We are convinced that only an approach that combines active diplomacy, support to Ukraine, and pressure on the Russian Federation to end their illegal war can succeed. We stand ready to support this work diplomatically, as well as by upholding our substantive military and financial support to Ukraine, including through the work of the Coalition of the Willing, and by upholding and imposing restrictive measures against the Russian Federation. We share the conviction that a diplomatic solution must protect Ukraine's and Europe's vital security interests. We agree that these vital interests include the need for robust and credible security guarantees that enable Ukraine to effectively defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Ukraine has the freedom of choice over its own destiny. Meaningful negotiation. So this is really important because they're saying, US, you don't get to decide Ukraine's destiny, its future. Only Ukraine can decide that. Meaningful negotiations can only take place in the context of a ceasefire or reduction of hostilities. The path to peace in Ukraine cannot be decided without Ukraine. We remain committed to the principle that international borders must not be changed by force. The current line of contact should be the starting point of negotiations. We reiterate that Russia's unprovoked and illegal invasion of Ukraine is a flagrant violation of the UN Charter, the Helsinki Final Act, the Budapest Memorandum, and successive Russian commitments. We underline our unwavering commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. We continue to stand firmly by the side of Ukraine. We are united as Europeans and determined to jointly promote our interests, and we will continue to cooperate closely with President Trump and the United States of America and with President Zelensky and the people of Ukraine for a peace in Ukraine that protects our vital security interests. Really, really important to state that. And that is a bit of a rebuttal to the American position as it appears. Now, they had this meeting in the UK. JD Vance was apparently there. This supposedly is JD Vance's car, getting the warm welcoming at Chevening House. It's only a few people here, but fascism equals terrorism. JD Vance out. Obviously not met warmly in the UK there. Now, the Wall Street Journal says Timothy Milovanov says, and again, we've kind of been over this, but useful synopsis from Milovanov as ever. Ukraine and Europe put forward a counter proposal to Putin's ceasefire proposal before Trump-Putin summit in Alaska on August 15th. So one, a ceasefire first. This is what Ukraine have said all along. No, we're not going to start negotiating over this and that until we have a ceasefire. You have a ceasefire, stop fighting, and then we negotiate. And that is a really useful tool for Ukraine because they can, I think, argue that and be justified in doing so. And that most people would see as pretty justifiable as a position, right? And that kind of stops this elongation of the war. You say, we're not going to have these negotiations for 6 months where we're going to be arguing to toss over this and that, and the fighting still goes on. Russia want to continue the fighting and prolong that, protract that fighting period. So Ukraine says, we do negotiations only when there's a ceasefire already agreed. And I think if they just keep going on at that, nope, not until there's a ceasefire, not until there's a ceasefire, then the US have to get on board with forcing Russia to have a ceasefire. I think this is a really good approach. 2, reciprocal territorial exchange. 3, ironclad security guarantees for Ukraine, including potential NATO membership. Totally agree with this. Putin's proposal demands Ukraine hand over 1/3 of eastern Donetsk region. Ukraine still controls, in exchange for a ceasefire, with front lines frozen elsewhere. One European negotiator stated, you can't start a process by ceding territory in the middle of fighting. European officials presented their plan to VP JD Vance, Secretary of State Rubio, and envoys Kellogg and Witkoff in England in the meeting. They called Putin's offer much worse than what Trump said, just giving Putin everything he wants in exchange for nothing. Trump let his sanctions deadline lapse after the Putin-Witkoff Kremlin meeting, agreeing to an Alaska summit instead. So Putin is tacoed. Trump is tacoed. Trump always chickens out. He's done that again with the sanctions. Zelensky called Putin's plan discussing the impossible and said Ukraine will not gift its land to anyone. Russia conquered less than 1% of Ukrainian territory over 2 years and lost hundreds of thousands of troops. Okay, so that's a pretty good synopsis there. So the EU is calling a meeting of EU foreign ministers on August the 11th in connection with the US-Russia meeting. Any deal between the US and Russia must include the EU and Ukraine. So that's coming from Max25. And then we have EU War Translated's Dimitri says EU foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas will convene European foreign ministers on Monday to discuss the Trump-Putin summit, Reuters reports. She said any US-Russia deal on ending the war must include the interests of Ukraine and the EU. So hopefully Europe will unite behind Ukraine. Of course, you've obviously got Robert Fico, who's still like Andriy Sybiha, the foreign minister for Ukraine, had to tell off essentially Robert Fico, who said that Ukraine is just grass being trampled under the feet of these big elephants, the US and Russia. And they're like, hang on, it's just completely belittling of Ukraine and seeing Ukraine as a pawn between these two fighting nations. And Fico can go and take a long walk off a short pier. Okay, then we have Matthew Whitaker, the ambassador to NATO, saying, it's pretty not particularly erudite here, but here he is.
Certainly, I think, I took Zelensky's comments at face value, which is that no big chunks or, sections are going to be just given that haven't been fought for or earned on the battlefield. But I come back to where I started, which is, we need this war to end. We could save thousands of lives with a deal. And I think that by both sides communicating, by President Trump meeting in Alaska on Friday with either one or both of the combatants, I think this is exciting. And I think President Trump's really the only one that could make this happen. He's the sole reason I think this meeting is happening on Friday. He's a peacemaker. He's averaging about a peace deal a month right now. We saw just this week where Armenia and Azerbaijan came together to settle their decades-long conflict.
This really frustrates me because I'm not sure Trump isn't the peacemaker. Trump is the stand at the end and say it's all about him. But Armenia and Azerbaijan were meeting with Turkey. Like all the work was done. Trump just comes along and says, "Look, I made peace," and it's really freaking frustrating. He's not a peacemaker, Trump. Anyway,
It's been a series of peace deals, and so I think President Trump is best situated to see if a deal can be had and if both sides can agree to ending the slaughter.
You are.
I mean, yeah, a lot of nothing really. Then you've had Lindsey Graham saying, the reporter asking him, this is Kristen Welker saying, do you believe Ukraine should sign a deal that includes giving up any part of their territory? And Graham says, I want to be honest with you, Ukraine is not going to evict every Russian, and Russia is not going to Kiev. There will be some land swaps at the end. He goes on to say, what will stop a third war is to keep arming Ukraine so that Russia will be deterred by the most lethal army in Europe right now, which is Ukraine. And that I agree with. Anyway, that's where we are at. Europe are uniting behind supporting Ukraine, and that is fantastic. But we're still at this situation where the US is seeking to appease Russia, and the proposals are pro-Russian proposals. And we're back to square one, where it's just impossible. It's constitutionally impossible for Zelensky to even remotely sign up to those proposals. So it's just, Putin succeeding in delaying and trying to get his way. And he has got his way with the US in terms of those sanctions have not been applied. Trump always chickens out, and he has done so again. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.